We are about to begin the Veterans History Project interview. My name is Tony Kierna. I am the genealogy coordinator of the Schaumburg Township District Library in Schaumburg, Illinois. I will be interviewing Richard Marquardt, United States Navy Cold War veteran, regarding his military service. Today's date is December the 17th, 2019. The interview is being conducted in the Schaumburg Township District Library TV studio. No one else is present in the room. Richard, thank you for participating in the Veterans History Project, and thank you so much for your military service.
Thank you.
It is a privilege and an honor to be able to conduct this interview with you.
Thank you.
So we always start just sort of at the beginning to get a little bit of background information on you and your life, early life. So give us an idea. When were you born?
November 30th, 1941.
Okay. And where were you born?
Chicago, Illinois.
So you're local to the area then?
Yeah, sure was.
And how about family? How about your parents?
My dad was Erich Franz Marquardt, immigrant from Germany at 8 years old. My mother was Marie Catherine Henning, who was, according to my grandfather, conceived in Ireland and born in the United States.
Okay, interesting. How about siblings?
I have 6 brothers and 1 sister.
6 brothers, that's a big family.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, well, 4 of them were stepbrothers.
Okay, okay.
And actually 4 stepbrothers, 1 stepsister, and 2 brothers from
And where in the order of your siblings are you?
Number 3.
Okay, all right. And school, where did you go to school? Grammar school, high school, any college?
I went to Nash Grammar School on the west side of Chicago.
Where's that located at?
Well, we're in Chicago and Cicero, around that area. And then I went to Austin High School, which I quit at 15, and wound up working for a year just to maintain my education. I had to go to continuation school for 1 day a week and work 4 days a week for my dad's drug company my dad related me to.
So what were you actually engaged in when you were working at such an early age?
Basically filling out forms.
Was it for your dad's, for his business?
Well, no, my dad was a pharmacist, and he knew this drug company, Gazola Drug Company, and he knew the owner, and the owner hired me as a temporary employee, we'll say.
Okay.
And they never paid me with a paycheck. They paid me in cash.
Okay.
And it was a good gig.
Okay. So then when you were doing this part-time schooling, did you have to complete a certain amount, like to finalize that process?
I had to spend a year in what they call continuation school.
Okay.
And at 16, I didn't have to continue anymore, but then my dad talked me into going back to high school. And at that time, I had relocated from my mom's home to my dad's home. They were divorced. And my dad talked me into going back to high school, so I went to Westcott Vocational School, which was a branch of CBS.
Okay.
And graduated from there.
Wow. I'm from Chicago too, but I don't think I've ever heard of that school. I've heard of CVS, Chicago Vocational.
Westcott was 117th and Halstead.
Okay. Okay. So now, at this point in time, did you complete anything that would allow you to then go on to college, or did you choose not to at that point?
Unfortunately, continuation school and vocational school wouldn't qualify you for any college enrollment. But eventually I did get into college.
Okay. And how about as far as like the thought process of getting into the military? Was that already sort of in your mind that you wanted to enlist?
I was working for Marshall Fields full time, and I'd worked there for a year, and I had just turned 18, and I could make my own decision whether to join the military or not and enlist, because I didn't have to have my parents' agreement. So I decided I would enlist.
Okay.
I had 2 older brothers. One was an exceptional businessman. He wound up becoming a CIO for a major company. And then a second older brother who was wound up becoming a professor of literature at New York University.
Wow.
And I had not achieved anything, so I had to get my own sort of perspective of what I was able to do.
Okay.
And my dad had put me through a testing to see how my skills were, and mechanical skills were very high. So I joined the Navy hoping to become a mechanic.
Did you and your family have any history of military service among other family members?
My dad, because he was a German citizen originally, worked for the government in the government laboratory, and they made him a citizen because he had to be a citizen to work for the government.
Okay.
And one of his brothers, my Uncle Lefty, joined the Marine Corps, and he became a citizen after he left the Marines.
Okay.
So those are only references to the military.
Okay. How did you focus in on the Navy as opposed to another branch or opposed to just waiting to get drafted?
Join the Navy, see the world.
Is that it? That's what did it?
Yeah.
Good marketing phrase,
It
I
was,
take it.
and I did see quite a bit of the United States and South Pacific.
So what was the process locally? How did you actually get through to enlist, and where did you get processed, and where did you go for basic training?
I basically went to downtown at the Daily Center now, but at that time it was an enlistment office.
Okay.
And they had all three branches were there, or actually four, including the Air Force. And I just went to the Navy, and they said, sure, we'll take you. And they said, report back here next morning at a certain time with basically just clothing necessary. And they had two options, either go to San Diego, California, or Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. And because I was a veteran of basically Chicago area, I knew what Great Lakes would be like in September, October, November. So I opted for San Diego. Unfortunately, San Diego was full.
So what year was it that you enlisted, and what time of the year was it?
It was September 1960.
Okay.
And I wanted to go to, like I said, San Diego, but they said, no, you can't. You have to go to Great Lakes. So I went to Great Lakes, and unfortunately, it was one of the coldest winters in 1960. And little did I know, I'd spend my 19th birthday freezing, and then 4 years later, my 22nd birthday freezing.
See, it got bookended.
Yeah, bookended, right.
So what did your parents and family think of you enlisting?
My mom wouldn't leave the bathroom. She locked the door and wouldn't leave the bathroom when I left.
Really?
She was crying in the bathroom.
Oh.
My dad slapped me on the back and said, make me proud.
How about your brothers and other family members?
My oldest brother, the one that was the business manager, he said, you didn't wind up getting a job. He said, you learn something, you get a job out of it. So that's what the whole objective is. Don't go there and spend 4 years nothing. Learn something.
Okay.
And my second oldest brother, he just said, don't be stupid.
So now you're at Great Lakes. Give us an idea. What was the process of training and getting you ready? And
Great Lakes was really most miserable, I think, basic training you could go through. But at the same time, it was hardening because I thought I had really knew how to handle the weather in the Chicago area. But they really taught me how to handle the weather. I mean, I was really, they kept you moving. And that's the best way to stay warm in Great Lakes was to keep running. They ran me to the chow hole, they ran me to the barracks, they ran me everywhere. I did more running in my life in 8 weeks than I ever done in my life.
Okay. Now, when you enlisted at that point, were you fairly small size, and did the training sort of beef you up?
I was 128 pounds.
Okay.
And just about 6 foot.
Oh, okay.
And I left basic training about 140 pounds, still 6 foot. But yeah, it beefed me up. There was a lot of physical training.
What were some of the parts of the training that you actually incurred? What could you describe to us?
Well, in the Navy they teach you two things. One is how to swim, or to survive in water. It's not swimming, it's surviving in water.
Okay.
In the Navy they say, you're in the water, your objective is to get out of the water. You don't want to spend your time in the water because there's things in the water that are not good for you. So they teach you how to survive in water and get out of the water as fast as possible. That was number one. So a lot of swimming. And I wasn't an avid swimmer, but I learned how to survive in water.
Okay.
Second thing was fire control. The fires on a ship are the biggest danger. So they put you in a room that's on fire, and they give you a hose, and there's a 5-man team, and the objective is to go in there and put out that fire. That is probably the most extensive training I ever had in my life.
Wow.
I never thought I would really be that afraid of doing something. But
And I'm assuming these were real fires?
they were
Or controlled fires?
Controlled fires, yeah. And they were in closed rooms.
Okay.
So you're going into a room where there's fire, and you've got nothing but a hose and a door behind you. That's it.
So at that point, you have to assess the nature of the fire and how...
You have to break it down piecemeal, where you're going to attack the fire, how you're going to attack the fire, and who's going to help you attack the fire. See, holding a fire hose is really very difficult to do. It takes more than one man to hold the hand, the nozzle.
Okay.
So you have another guy behind you holding your arms to hold the nozzle, and then you have a guy behind you, behind him holding him, so when you hit that force of that water, it doesn't throw everybody back. So literally you're diving into this fire holding this hose, and the hose is trying to pull you away at the same time. Okay. So it's very intense.
Okay. What was the length of the initial training at Great Lakes, time-wise?
8 weeks.
8 weeks?
8 weeks, 8.5 weeks. Actually.
Did you have any choices then to already start preparing for advanced training in a certain skill?
I had, at that time, they had testing, again, to see our qualifications, and again, I came up high on the mechanical skills. So they said that the Navy needs mechanics, and there's aircraft mechanics, and there's ship mechanics. So I had a choice between aircraft and ships, and I chose aircraft.
Okay, wow, that's pretty interesting. So now you got done with your initial 8 weeks at Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Where was the next advanced training?
Memphis, Tennessee, Naval Air Station, Memphis. That's where they trained me, both being hydraulic mechanic, which I became, aircraft hydraulic mechanic, and at the same time they taught me to be, or tested me to be qualified for a crew member on aircraft.
Okay. Now again, let me back up just a little bit. What percent of the enlistees went actually onto ships or the naval part on water versus the aircraft stuff? Was it a good amount?
It was probably like 60% ship and
Ships?
40%
Really?
aviation. Yeah.
I guess, even personally, I guess I was not even aware that 40% would be such a high number relative to ship planes.
Well, the ships, the aircraft carrier was the big thing those days.
Yeah.
So you had to have an aircraft mechanic either on a ship or on land.
Okay.
And so basically you had aircraft people on ships as well as ship personnel.
Okay. So now how long was the advanced training for?
It was almost 3 months, 2.5 months.
Okay.
And that was very intense training. They had the part of learning the mechanical was no problem. I learned the mechanical pretty fast. But to become a crew member, you had to go through several testings. And one was what they call a Dilbert Dunker. It's a cockpit of an airplane on a slide, we'll say. The slide's about 25 or 30 feet up in the air. Mm-hmm. And the slide goes down into the water and turns upside down. And you're strapped into that cockpit. So you go down that slide into the water, and then the cockpit turns upside down. Now you have to think in terms of how to get out. Okay. And the objective is you got to swim down first to get out before you come back up again. And
that kind of training would not be just for pilots, or was this for everybody?
Crew members. All crew members had to go through that.
Okay.
Another one was a parachute escape. They put you in a harness of a parachute. It's attached to a long cable at the end of the pool, mm-hmm. and then they pull the cable, and you're supposed to get out of that harness before you get to the other end of the pool. It'd be like if you had a parachute and you're in a harness and a parachute, you had to roll out of the harness to get out of or the parachute would bring you down, drown you.
Did you guys have any during the training parts, which sounds like pretty dangerous to some extent, any really close calls? Whether it was you or other in your squad there?
I'm 20 years old. Nothing was dangerous. Everything was fun. One of them was also, if you're an aircraft carrier, the height of an aircraft carrier to the water is about 35 to 40 feet down. So they put you in a tower 35 to 40 feet up, and they tell you to step off the tower into the pool.
Okay.
And that is a little bit terrifying because you're 6 feet tall, you're looking down 35 feet into 12 feet of water. So your visual is about something like 40 to 50 feet. So and they say walk off this plank onto that, and it's just panicky. But at the same time, you're trained to how to handle it. Yeah, I did it. And it surprised me. My heart was pounding through my ears.
Were there any in your squad at that time in training that just froze up there and they couldn't do it?
Oh yeah.
What was happening then?
They put them to the back of the line, and they don't let them walk away. Just put them in the back of the line, go back again, try it again.
Did anybody get pushed in?
No, he can't push you.
Okay. So it's a voluntary, you have to ultimately reach that point
Yes,
to go.
that's where you have to learn to take orders. Your orders are to go, go. You don't think about it, you do it because it's going to save your life if you do. So basically that's the whole objective of training you to do something like that.
Okay, wow. So at this point now, when you successfully, obviously you completed it successfully, how much more training was involved at the Memphis location?
Outside of the aircraft training, as far as learning how to do what my job was hydraulic mechanic, how to repair hydraulic lines, how to disassemble hydraulic functioning devices. Basically, it was more mechanical than anything else, just logistics, learning how to maintain your supplies and stuff like that.
Was your training on certain specific kinds of aircraft?
No. It was just, you had to sort of appraise the aircraft as you went to it, what kind of hydraulic lines, what kind of pressure was involved, what kind of valves were necessary. So you evaluated each plane as you went into it. And they didn't have any specific planes, so they put you in different scenarios. Okay. And you had to sit there and say, okay, I know that type of valve, I know that type of plumbing or linings, what kind of pressure is involved. So you evaluated right then and there how you're going to work on it.
Wow. I mean, obviously you could encounter situations where you couldn't do anything in a plane to fix it. Something had to maybe be done on the exterior?
We always call that jury rig, make it work. The jury rig was anything that makes the thing function, you've done the job.
Okay.
So, and pilots did not appreciate that when you would say you jury rigged it, because they wanted to know you put the best parts in there and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So pilots were at our mercy.
Did you ever have to actually jerry rig something up?
Yeah, we did.
And you had enough of the equipment around to do it?
And I had professional, well not professional, what we call old salts, the guys that knew how to do things like that, show me how to do it.
Okay.
So they had done it before.
Wow. So now again in Memphis, this is about a 3-month period.
Yeah.
Was there further training that you encountered after Memphis, or were you now to go on to be assigned to whatever location you were going to be at?
Well, I was assigned to another location, and I was going to be retrained there as well.
And what location was that?
It was Lemoore, California.
Okay.
It was in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley. It's a desert, basically. The first Navy base in the desert. And I was what they call a plank owner. The first 300 people to report to the base became what they call plank owners.
Okay.
So we did everything from setting up the barracks, setting up the hangars.
So this wasn't like further training, this was more like helping, you were a warm body to put something together?
Yeah, right, basically, yeah. Myself and about 300 other guys, our objective was to start the ball rolling. We even worked on the runways. They were finishing because they had to put up barriers at the end of the runway for planes for emergency landings and so forth. So we had to put those up. I didn't do any hydraulic work for maybe 4 months.
Wow.
And then about 4 months, then I became what they call line maintenance.
Okay.
So the planes would come in, and myself and about 5 other guys, our jobs were to maintain the oxygen supply and the hydraulic lines and the fuel for those jets that came in.
Okay. During this time of all this training that you're undergoing, do you remember any unique trainers that you had that were really special to you, or that really got you some really good skillful knowledge?
Well, I don't know about skillful knowledge. There's a lot of guys, I was with a lot of really old salts.
Okay.
Guys that had spent many years in the Navy career, and many were career mechanics. And he taught me techniques that I was never taught in school.
Okay.
And they taught me how to do some things that you could do that you didn't have to have the right tool to do. Okay. You could do it sort of hodgepodge.
And so there's your jerry rigging, how you became able to do that. How about even during this whole period of time, during training and everything, what were you able to do for having fun or recreation?
Well, in Lemoore, California, not much.
How about even like Great Lakes? Anything in Great Lakes?
No.
Or Memphis, or?
Memphis, I'll say we had some good times in Memphis. I'll say that. They gave us a couple weekend passes. Memphis, Tennessee was really a lot of fun.
Okay.
We had some pretty good parties, we'll say. The main objective in Memphis, Tennessee was the food was just phenomenal. And some food I hated, but
And this was food off base when you were able to go for fun?
Off base food was horrible.
Really?
But to get a decent meal off base was phenomenal. You know?
Wow.
And ribs, to this day, I'm a rib fan.
Okay.
I had the best barbecue ribs of my life in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. So now you're in California doing this. You obviously had to then be assigned to the next phase of your service. What was coming up at that point?
They said I could stay in Lemoore till my enlistment was over.
Wow. But you would be doing your hydraulic training on planes at that point, right?
I mean, it's still doing the same job, yeah. But then they also said that they had offered volunteer service to a squadron, an experimental squadron in Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and the squadron went to the Antarctic.
Okay.
And anybody interested in going there, volunteering.
Okay.
Now, I'd been in Lemoore, California for about 6 months. It was 100 and some degrees almost every day. I was just being cooked, and I really hated the heat.
Wow.
So I said, why not?
You just wanted to get that Chicago weather experience again.
No, I didn't. But I did want to get something different, because I said it was kind of boring.
So how many volunteers were they looking for to go to the Antarctic?
Oh, they just said anybody. You volunteered and then you had to qualify.
Okay.
So they had volunteers come in freely.
And now when you volunteered for this wasn't over and above your enlistment period, right?
No,
this was during your
that
enlistment period.
Right. It was to avoid the boredom of working line maintenance the rest of my life until I got out of the service.
And did the Navy at that time get plenty of volunteers to go?
I don't know how many really came with me. I know I was with about 5 guys from that Lemoore. 5 that went from Lemoore, I think 3 made it, 2 didn't qualify.
Okay. And like again, what was the process for you to test through or be evaluated for in order to go to the Antarctic?
Well, there was a psychological evaluation first. They ask you why you want to go there, and you tell them, I've never been there, I want to try something different. Do you know how dangerous it might be? You know, I don't. They just sort of question you on your logic and why you would do something like that.
Okay.
And the other question was, what would you do if you couldn't do anything for like 4 months, if you had to stay in the same area for 4 months, you know? How would you handle your boredom? Mm-hmm. And you'd have the answer like I'd read, or maybe in my case I was a cartoonist, artist type technique, so I'd do some painting and stuff like that. So I qualified in a psychological test, and the other test was mechanically, they need hydraulics men. My rating, aviation hydraulics man, was a very tight rating. There weren't many qualified to do the rating.
Okay. And at this time of your service, what rank were you?
I started out as an airman apprentice, and then airman, and then I became a 3rd class petty officer, and wound up leaving the Navy as a 2nd class petty officer, E5, which is about equal to a sergeant.
Okay, all right. So now you were, I guess, preparing to go off to the Antarctic. How did this all come about? What were the steps that were taken in order to finally get you to the Antarctic?
Well, first of all, I had to have a purpose of the squadron. What was my function in the squadron? As a hydraulic mechanic, my function was maintaining the big aircraft we had. We had C-130s, and they were hydraulic men's nightmare and love at the same time. A lot of hydraulic functions.
And why was that? Why was it such a mixture?
Well, because it was so huge, and it had a lot of power controls, and the power controls had to be done hydraulically.
Okay.
So, and then at the same time, they had skis on these C-130s, and there was the first C-130 that had skis on it, and that was a major hydraulic problem, because it took a lot of pressure to raise and lower these skis over the regular landing gear.
Wow.
So there was a lot of work on just maintaining the ski supply of the hydraulic lines for the skis.
Okay. So geographically, what were the steps after Memphis or after the location in California to ultimately get to?
I took a train from California to Chicago to New York to Rhode Island. Quonset Point, Rhode Island, that's where I checked in. And that's where I took the psychological test. That's where I also took the validation based on my experience working line maintenance at Lemoore, working on planes. And at that time I was working on fighter airplanes.
Okay.
So I had to qualify to work on C-130s, excuse me, cargo airplanes.
Okay.
So cargo airplanes are much larger, much more demanding as far as amount of work necessary. And I had to work with some very, very, very competent and capable men to work on those planes.
Okay. So what was, again, how did you ultimately arrive in the Antarctic?
Well, they flew
And what year and what time of the year was this?
Okay, 62 was when I got to Quonset Point. And
where's Quonset Point?
Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
Quonset Point was, let's see, I think it was like August of 62, I think it was. And then deployment was September. And deployment meant the whole squadron would fly from Quonset Point to California, to Hawaii, to Christchurch, New Zealand, and then to the Antarctic.
Man, now did we have a base in New Zealand, or was that sort of the gratis of New Zealand to allow you guys to go there?
It was a complimentary base New Zealand government gave us that.
Okay.
And basically it wasn't for us particularly, it's for scientific expeditions.
Okay.
Scientific expeditions figured Christchurch was the best location for both logistics and flight time to the Antarctic.
What would be the distance between Christchurch and ultimately the Antarctic?
I don't know mileage. I would say flight time was about 4.5 hours.
Oh, that's still a long distance, it seems like.
Oh yeah. Well, that was just to McMurdo, and then from McMurdo to the South Pole was another 4.5 hours.
Wow.
The Antarctic continent is larger than the United States.
Okay.
So fly from one point to another is like flying from one coast to the other.
Okay. So how long did your travel take until you finally got to your destination where that was going to be the point of leaving for the Antarctic?
That was a challenge. If you were a C-130 crew, which I was not, and I was what's called a complimentary crew member. That means if they needed another crew member, they could adopt me, but I wasn't part of the flying crew. So those crew members flew on the C-130s down. The rest of the crew came down on military air transport, which is basically an Air Force controlled, how would I describe it, shuttle bus.
Okay.
It literally took us from Quonset Point, flew us to Travis Air Force Base. We spent the night at Travis Air Force Base, and then we flew from Travis Air Force Base to Pearl Harbor, and at Pearl Harbor, Hickam Field. We stayed there and waited until we had a +5 wind factor, because it's such a long haul.
Hey, what is a +5 wind factor?
It means you have to have tailwind.
Oh, okay.
Because the fuel consumption flying from Pearl Harbor or Hickam to Christchurch, actually it wasn't Christchurch, it was Canton Island, was really critical. So you had to have a good tailwind to make sure you could have enough fuel to get to Canton Island.
Okay, wow.
And Canton Island was 25 miles south of the equator. And we landed there just long enough to fuel up and take off 2 hours later, and we flew then heading for New Zealand, and we lost an engine on the way in, so we had to land in Fiji. And in Fiji, we spent 3 days waiting for a replacement engine part.
Wow. Was it a hydraulics problem that you could have fixed?
No, it was a engine problem, fortunately. and unfortunately, I had to help fix it. Well, it was an all-man crew.
Okay.
Everybody worked. In the Navy, there's no such thing as a specialist.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, obviously you were in the Navy. Was there a whole variety of servicemen from different service branches that were all going to Antarctica, or was it always a Navy operation?
That's an interesting thing. This is what I realized after reviewing it. At the time I went in 62, 63, it was all Navy. The Navy flew the C-130s, the Navy flew logistics to the South Pole. The Navy, we had a paramedics, pararescue team. It was Navy.
Okay.
We had the Seabees building all the bases, Navy Seabees. We had the ships coming in, bringing in supplies, and you had the Coast Guard.
Now, the ships were coming into McMurdo, or
Yeah.
okay, and McMurdo was like the staging area to get further to the South Pole.
McMurdo was the base station for all U.S.
Okay.
movements out of the Antarctic. And the Coast Guard would have icebreakers coming in. They'd break up the ice so that the Navy ships could come in with the big supplies.
Wow.
So
So McMurdo was the U.S. Were there then other countries' bases?
18 countries had bases.
Wow. Were they fairly all bunched together, or were they spread out over a big
everywhere.
area?
They had we had New Zealand was near us. Russia was pretty far away. Russia was there. Argentina was there. Australia was there. Everybody, it seemed like it was a multinational.
Wow. And did every country sort of stage off of Christchurch to get to their base?
Not necessarily. Most of them had another staging point, depending on which was easiest logistically. Argentina was more along the finer coast, which is closer to Argentina. Russia flew right basically over us. Okay. They flew to their base station. And then they had, I think, 3 stations down there. One was the worst station it could possibly be, Rostock, which had the record coldest temperature recorded, 127 below zero.
Straight 127 below, or that wind chill?
I don't know. No, it wasn't the wind chill was not a factor. Nobody even thought about wind chill at that time. It was just air temperature.
Wow.
And they had the record of 127 below zero air temperature.
Oh my gosh.
But, yeah. But McMurdo wasn't too bad. It was like 20, 30 below at the most.
Okay. So you arrive at McMurdo.
Yeah.
How was it transitioning to, what was the temperature when you guys arrived?
Oh, when I arrived, it was summer down there.
Oh, okay.
It was like 10 below.
Okay.
12 below. And it's so different, such a different world. Really, people don't understand the Antarctic, and it's a desert. It's very dry. Mm-hmm. It's very cold, but it's very dry cold. And literally, your lips will crack if you spend too much time outside.
Okay.
You just can't keep the moisture in your body. It just sucks it right out of you. We would wash our underwear sometimes and hang it outside, and in maybe 2 hours, it would be bone dry because it sucked all the moisture out of the underwear.
But it probably would be all frozen over
then, too.
It
was frozen, but you'd just bring it in and thaw out.
Yeah.
But the point was it would be bone dry.
Yeah.
It was just phenomenally how you just don't realize that until you get there. The cold is so different. I thought Chicago area I can handle the cold. Mm-hmm. It's a different cold. Okay. It's a kind of cold that just sucks everything out of you. It just drains you.
So when you get to McMurdo and it's the summertime in McMurdo, how long were you initially going to be stationed there?
3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Depending on your function and your arrival time was determined your departure time. So the earlier you came, the earlier you left.
Okay. And so at McMurdo, what did you have to do to support now? Because this was a scientific kind of population of Americans that were down there, and you were in essence supporting them and their efforts. And what was all involved in that?
Basically supply, bringing supplies to all their stations. They must have had, let's say, there were 8 or 10 major stations down there.
So McMurdo was their home base, but the stations you're referring to were in some way either near the South Pole or in various areas of Antarctica?
The South Pole was the furthest, but most of them were fairly nearby, like 2-hour flights, maybe an hour and a half flight. And basically there were supplies of fuel and food and maybe scientific experimental material. Okay. And it was basically just keep things moving down there because most activity was during the winter, or summer I should say. So winter, everything is pretty much shut down. Okay.
And what was the size of the Navy team that was there supporting all of this activity?
Well, my squadron was a total of 480 people.
Did you have what was the number of the squadron, name of the squadron?
VX6. V standing for Transport X Experimental. And the objective, was it was experimental in a lot of ways. We tested equipment, we tested aircraft, we tested snowmobiles down there. We tested all kinds of equipment down there that people would say, well, can you operate that mechanical device in the Antarctic or in cold weather? And we did. We tested it to see if it worked.
But that was for the interest of the Navy or the military to test it?
It was basically for everybody's interest, really. The scientists wanted to know how to use that, too. How they could generate their own electricity and so forth in the cold. And how they could transport themselves without having like sled dogs. We had sled dogs down there. New Zealanders had sled dogs down there.
Wow.
And they ran their sled dogs. And we used to go visit the sled dog base just to play with the pups.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So at McMurdo, did you guys have interactions with the other countries' bases or something? Visit them?
Well, New Zealand, yes, because they were friends. And we were allies in a lot of ways, and they were also helping us base out of Christchurch. Australia sometimes. Russia one time. Russia had sent a whole bunch of engineers to their base, not Bostock, but another base, but they had a fuel crisis, so they wound up landing at McMurdo. So the Russians spent 2 days at McMurdo,
Okay.
sharing our barracks.
That's amazing.
And that was fun.
Speaking of barracks, how were you housed?
Well, we the enlisted were housed in what they call Quonset huts.
Okay.
They were canvas-covered buildings with mattresses in between the canvases to the insulation, wooden floors, oil stove in the center of the barrack.
And how many were in there, in your Quonset hut?
Between 25 and 30.
Okay.
And your rank had its privilege. The higher the rank, the closer you could get to the stove.
Oh,
So your bed would be closest to the stove. You didn't have to wear as much at bedtime.
And again, what was the size of the Navy squad that was down there?
Well, originally it was 480 was their whole squadron, but about half of them would come down, and the other half would stay in New Zealand.
Okay.
And then the next year, the half that stayed in New Zealand would come down, and the other half would go back to New Zealand. So it was a rotation basis.
So if you were there for the summer, then the replacement, you rotated out and then they came for the summer, or did they come for the winter?
No, the winter had to be volunteers.
Oh.
And that's another part of that psychological test was, did you qualify to be a winter over, what they call winter over.
Okay.
And if you winter over, you were actually in New Zealand in the summer, and then you came down for the winter.
So your first experience was arriving in their summertime down in Antarctica?
Yeah, my first was a 1-month tour.
Oh, and why would it be such a short time?
Indoctrination, and at the same time I was working for the public relations department. They hired me to be their artist and cartoonist for their yearbook for the squadron. So okay.
How did they know that you had such a skill?
I was doing sketches of guys' girlfriends and stuff like that for them to put on their barracks wall or where it might be. So somebody heard about that and they said, well, we could use somebody who could draw because we need some artwork for the yearbook. So I got out of a lot of really nasty, hard work doing nothing more than just making cartoons and drawing pictures.
And again, these were cartoons to be used by the military, the base,
the squadron.
Just the
squadron.
Wow.
It was you had to lighten up the load down there because sometimes it got pretty serious. And if you didn't have a joke of one kind or another going on.
So when you were down there for the summer, I guess describe to me, I've never experienced this. Obviously you were down there at times when it was sunlight 24 hours a day?
Yep.
What does that feel like?
It's very hard to sleep. It's to the point where you really want a dark look. The barracks was always dark, pitch dark if we could make it that way, because you had so much light and the glare off the snow and ice is just horrendous. And we were also, McMurdo was on nothing more than lava ash, because it's an active volcano right behind you that had spread all this lava ash on the base. So you had the lava ash and you had the snow. It was just horrible conditions. You wanted someplace where it was just quiet and dark.
Okay.
And that's everything I meant to it, quiet. In the Antarctic, it's so quiet.
Really?
If you weren't making the noise, you couldn't hear anything. There was nothing to hear. There were no animals making noises. I mean, the penguins were so far away, I mean, you didn't hear them.
Okay.
And it was sort of spooky in a sense. If you were out there during the 2 o'clock in the morning.
So describe a little bit then, you're going to do a mission or you're going to do whatever. Did you fly from McMurdo with supplies to the South Pole?
Yep.
Okay, give us an idea. What was like a typical mission?
Well, only one mission from Christchurch to McMurdo, and that was to come down to the base. Once we got to the base, then the missions there were daily squadron calls. What was a call? We also did the radio communications. The Navy did radio communications between the scientists and the base stations. So scientists say we're running low on fuel, we're running low on food, whatever it might be. So then what the base setup would be, load up a C-130, fly it to that destination if we could get a C-130.
Now, flying it from Christchurch or flying it from McMurdo? Okay.
And in McMurdo, we had to depend on the supply ships to bring in the replacement supplies because we only could fly so much in from Christchurch. So if the ships couldn't come through, then we were in dire straits.
Okay.
And I remember one of the biggest things we should listen for was to hear the icebreakers breaking the ice at night. You could hear it. And then all night, 24/7. The poor guys in those icebreakers, I don't know how they did that, just hitting that ice 24/7, breaking it up so that they could get the cargo ships in. That was, to me, I think that was probably the worst job you probably could have had.
Jeez. Were they stationed out of Christchurch?
No, they were
too?
on the ships. They stayed on the icebreakers. They lived
in McMurdo? And
they came into McMurdo, and occasionally would have a beer in McMurdo and then go back out again. That would be it.
Wow.
They had to keep going through the ice to keep it from reforming.
Yeah. So you're at McMurdo. Did you yourself have any opportunity to actually make it to the South Pole?
No.
Did you come close?
Close.
Okay.
There was a couple of flights we had going there. And, see, the South Pole was more of a VIP location or a scientific location.
Okay.
My squadron, the objective was to fly the equipment there, kick it off, and take off.
And kick it off means?
You just drop the ramps on the C-130s, kick the supplies out literally onto the snow, and then close the door and take off again.
Okay.
And the VIPs would get off and they'd spend a couple days there and then we'd pick them up on the next trip back. But the crew stayed on the plane.
So were you ever able to land the plane, or were these always kickoffs?
Oh,
with
the landing was a kickoff. We landed, lowered the ramp, kicked it off, and then raised the ramp and took off again.
Okay, okay.
But the plane just kept moving because you didn't want those engines shutting down on that cold temperature because it may not start again.
Wow. Did you ever have a situation where, and maybe it wasn't a kickoff run, but did you ever have it where the plane just simply wouldn't work?
They've had situations, I wasn't on one, but they've had situations where planes were downed en route to one of the bases, and then they'd have to send another plane in to kick off supplies or repairs. And again, these are some of the guys that I worked with that I really respected a lot because they worked out in the field. They actually were working on planes in 20, 30 degree below zero weather.
Wow.
I fortunately did not have to do many of that. I think I did maybe one or two occasions where I had to work on a plane in that cold. But these guys did it every time, every day.
Wow.
They really earned their paycheck.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the daylight, the 24 hours. And did you then, after your summer tour, did you head back to Christchurch, and then did you return, and did you come back for a winter term?
No winter. Never wanted to do a winter. When we arrived in the summer, the first flight in, which I was, the people that greeted you were the winter people.
Okay.
And you looked in those eyes, and you looked at those faces. These guys are so grateful to see daylight, so grateful to see someone to take over their job.
Wow.
That you didn't want to be that person. It had to take a lot of stamina to survive a whole winter down there.
Did you, I mean, obviously the Antarctic is a very isolated location. Did you feel isolated down there because the communications that we have today didn't exist then in terms of, ease of communication with the internet and all that?
Yeah. Prime example, we had ham radio operators that would connect to the Antarctic. So if I wanted to talk, I did talk to my dad from the Antarctic.
Now, was that arranged in advance to make the connection?
Yeah, they said where you want to make the connection. I said Chicago, Illinois, and then fortunately they found a ham radio operator out of San Francisco. Wow. And then the ham radio operator made a phone call from San Francisco to my dad.
Okay.
And my dad got on the phone from there, and then he connected his phone into the ham radio operator.
Okay.
I talked to my dad, but because of the distance, we had to talk really slow.
Really?
Because the words got distorted if they were said too fast because of the transmission period.
Okay. How did you get more than just one opportunity to connect? One.
Well, it was a lottery deal.
And what was the time interval during the summer that you were down there in McMurdo?
But months, October through February.
Okay.
And October was just breaking daylight.
Okay.
Actually, September was breaking daylight. October was almost 24/7 the daylight. And then February was twilight.
Okay. Wow. So you had the phone call. How about regular correspondence? Were you guys writing letters up to family and receiving them?
We got letters. It was hard to write letters. We had a post office there. They had a post office, and that was a major thing. I had sent my dad a postcard stamped from McMurdo Station, Antarctica, which he kept for many years. But communication outward wasn't as much as inward. And
Okay.
a prime example of this, occasionally you'd have what they call whiteouts in the Antarctic, which are, the wind is blowing so strong that it's literally blowing the snow, what very little snow there is, so intensely it's like a white, like being inside of a milk bottle.
Okay.
You cannot see your hands in front of your face. We had a plane coming from Christchurch with the mail on it, and it got into above Christchurch, get into McMurdo after leaving Christchurch in the middle of a whiteout, so they couldn't land. So they had to lighten the cargo, lighten the load, so they could stay up in the air longer waiting for the storm to go pass up. So they kicked all the mail off about 2,000 feet.
Wow.
And it landed on the ice in
Yeah,
McMurdo.
yeah.
After the storm cleared and the plane came in and landed, they sent teams out trying to find the mail. And this is my 22nd birthday now. My sister-in-law sent me a birthday cake. That birthday cake had dropped from 2,000 feet onto the ice.
Oh my God.
When they found it, the can was about that thick.
Okay.
It was originally this thick.
Okay.
And inside, everything was smashed. And the only reason I knew it was a birthday cake, when I opened up the can, the little plastic thing that said happy birthday on it was still intact. But the rest of it had been frozen so hard that by the time I thawed out, it just crumbled into pieces.
Oh my gosh.
But,
Wow.
but then guys got letters. They got page 3 of a letter.
Okay. Well, out of curiosity, when you were on duty down there, did you rotate through all the shifts, or were you like on 8 hours, 12 hours? How did a daily work for you?
What was it? Worked 7 days a week.
Okay.
Actually 6.5. Half a day was for church. But basically the rotation hours were based on what your function was, based on what was happening at the base. At each day the base had an assignment. Is it going to transport stuff? Is it going to evaluate supplies? Is it going to maintain aircraft? You know, what the daily basis was would depend on your
Okay.
schedule. But you had a 12-hour work shift.
Okay.
So
Did you have to float between 12 hours on what would be the day period versus 12 hours on a night?
We
Or
didn't have any days. I mean, everything was days, so it was basically just work until your job was done, and then if you had another time segment left, like say I worked 8 hours working on a we'll say a supply project. When that got done, you still had another 4 hours worth of work. They'll find something else for you to do.
Okay.
So they had to keep you working. The objective was to keep you busy because idle hands are devil's workshop. And
How was it in the Quonset? Was it comfortable in the Quonset huts that you had to stay
depend on
in?
your rank. Again, I was E5. I got close to the stove. Comfort, you had a lot of friends. And when you get bored, which we got bored quite a bit sometimes, we would sit around and just tell jokes. And you're surprised how many people had jokes. I mean, it just went up. And you had to have the humor. If you didn't have the humor, if you couldn't laugh at it, you get too serious about
Did
it.
they have like a recreation center where you guys could shoot pool or do anything like that?
We had a ping pong table.
Okay. Was it in your barracks or was it?
No,
was it a recreation
separate
center?
location.
Okay.
They had a ping pong table. Right next to it was some weights you could lift. And there was a video screen. I think it was a little video thing. You could watch some videos.
Okay.
But outside of that, there wasn't much going on. We didn't have a library. We wanted a library.
Oh, library.
No.
Wow.
The church, we had the church, the cathedral, or chapel, the snow. They could go there, and there was some reading literature there, but that's about it.
Did you ever ask your parents to send you anything special? Other than, I mean, you got the birthday cake that got smashed, but anything else that you really needed that you couldn't get
Actually, everything I needed I could get there. And the Navy really had a good supply base. You could buy things down there that were duty-free, obviously.
Oh, okay.
So you could buy clothing, you could buy, at one time I bought a shortwave radio, which was fantastic because I could pick up radio signals from the United States and listen to music from the United States.
Did you get the equivalent of like an R&R to leave to come home for any amount of time, or was it that your 4-month tour was short enough that you just did that and then you went back to Christchurch?
That's it, 4 months there, and then back to Christchurch. You had 3 days in Christchurch after you got back.
And then after 3 days there, then?
You went to work in the hangars or something like that at Christchurch.
In Christchurch, okay.
So they had you literally get associated or reconditioned back to Christchurch before you went back to work.
Okay.
And that was a major event.
Okay. So did you rotate back ever during another summer down there, or were you there for the 4-month window?
1 month down there for indoctrination and basically setting up the public relations program they had there. And then the second time down was being a mechanic, and at the same time public relations.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So what was the total length of time you were down in the Antarctic?
1 month in 62 and 4 months in 63.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Wow. So did you, obviously in 1963 was the Kennedy assassination. Did you guys hear about that down there?
Not until 3 days later.
Wow.
And here's an interesting thing. In the Antarctic, in the Chow Hall, there's a picture of JFK signed to the men of Antarctica. Thank you for your service.
Wow.
I remember sitting underneath that and hearing about Kennedy's assassination. It was sort of a personal thing.
Interesting. Wow. So your service down there. So you must have been getting near your end period of your service in Antarctica. What was it now? What were you going to rotate back to, coming back to the States, and how much time did you have left in your service?
On 63, I left there in February of 64. Went down in October of 63 and got out in February.
How was it? How did you feel when you were known that was you were leaving then? What was that feeling?
I was so anxious to leave. I went a day early to the takeoff point with my Seabag. I slept on my Seabag to make sure I'd be available for the first to get on that plane, get out of there.
Did anybody else do that?
Two other guys.
Really?
2 other guys were down there. One guy was down there 2 days earlier.
Wow. So you were happy to get out for that moment and to come back to some form of civilization.
Yeah, I was happy because there was a couple things. There was a girl in New Zealand that I was fond of. It was just to get back to reality, real world. Again, like I said, it's such a different world down there.
Yeah.
And then you don't smell anything down there.
Interesting.
Your taste buds are even affected somewhat. And again, real food. We were eating, for breakfast it would be steak and eggs, steak and powdered eggs for breakfast, chipped beef on toast for lunch, steak and powdered potatoes for dinner, and fruit cocktail was your only other source of...
and I'm assuming that was canned fruit cocktail,
yeah,
obviously.
So when we got back to New Zealand, the first thing you did, when the cargo door opened up, first thing, is you smell fresh air. You smell, actually, things you hadn't smelled for 4 months. Grass, flowers. It's just phenomenal. Your whole sense of smell just wakes up. Okay. And then the other thing was a good salad, fresh fruit. You just couldn't wait to get them. And the other thing was a hot shower.
Okay. So you had did you have hot water down there for showers, or?
Water's very sparse down there because it takes a lot of snow and ice to make water. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. So we were limited to 3-minute showers.
Okay.
1 minute in to get wet, step out, lather up, and another minute go in and to rinse off. So basically, in 3 minutes you were done. To have maybe spend 40 minutes in a shower was the primary thing that I wanted to do when I got there. And back to New Zealand, I took a chair and sat down, a folding chair, and sat down in a shower just for the hot water.
Wow. Did you develop any real close friendships down there?
Yeah, a couple of guys. Well, you're with a guy, you're with people for 4 months in a barracks, tight barracks. You become friends pretty fast.
And did that friendship continue many years afterwards?
After I got out, yeah. Again, in '64, when they asked me to extend another 2 years for Gulf of Tonkin,
Okay.
I said no, and I went to standby or inactive reserve, which became standby reserve. And several of my buddies were also put on the same situation, so we called each other on the phone, and we pretty much had a communication for about a year of just saying, oh, if we ever get together, will we get together, blah, blah, blah. We never did, though.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So let's finish off the part about ultimately coming back to the States. Because you still had, I assume, you still had some service time left. And what was going to unfold as you were coming back to the States? Where were you going to be going to?
Back to Quonset Point, and basically training people to replace me.
Okay. For work in the Antarctic?
Well, basically working on the planes.
Okay.
And then Antarctic, that would be, they'd learn their own way on that.
I gotcha.
We tell them stories, but nobody listens to stories. I mean, I could talk to you forever about the Antarctic, but to be there is a different story. So the story sounds like this is a story, but in reality there's more to it.
Okay.
There's an emotional thing to it. So, like the sea salts tell me about the times that they were in the Navy and the things that happened to them. You can't relate to it unless you've been there. Yeah. And so we didn't talk much about the Antarctic, but I did want to make sure that the guys that replaced me knew how to do a good job and be a mechanic.
Okay. So now you're back in Rhode Island. What was going to unfold for you there as your service time was coming to its end?
Well, first of all, was I going to extend my enlistment for 2 years? And that Gulf of Tonkin had happened, and I didn't know if I wanted to do that. And I said, no, I don't think so. A couple of my friends did. One got pretty well chewed up in Vietnam, and I never heard what happened to him. I just know he went to Vietnam as a corpsman. He was a corpsman.
Okay.
And he worked with Marines. Corpsmen worked with Marines. Marines didn't have their own corpsmen, so the Navy did the corpsmanship. And I guess he got pretty well chewed up in Vietnam. No, my objective at the time was, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And I had the GI Bill. And I had mechanical training in aircraft, so I thought maybe I'd become an aircraft mechanic.
So at this point you were out of the service?
I was planning.
Okay, you were planning the next step for yourself.
Yeah, what would I do? And they had several military advisors that would give you some sort of heads up on what you could do. And they told you about your GI Bill and using it for education. And I said, well, I want to become a mechanic, and I actually had a representative from United Airlines there that was really the hiring people that were coming out of the military.
Okay.
They needed mechanics, but I didn't have the proper license. I had what they call airframe license, and you needed an A&P license, which is airframe and power plant. So to get a power plant license, I'd have to go to Lewis College in Illinois to get the power plant, and I'd have to use my GI Bill, and that's 2 years.
Okay.
That would be only 2 years of a 4-year payout on the GI Bill. I said, that's kind of a waste. So I wound up going to University of Illinois.
So you were back home now in Chicago. Where were you living now in Chicago?
With my parents.
Same location. Okay.
My mom did something horrible. At that time, 2 years after I got out, I was on standby reserve. And they said, like I said, I get a letter every 30 days saying standby for me to recall, maintain a full Seabag. And one time, they called me back to Glenview Naval Air Station to get ready to go back to San Diego to be reassigned out of San Diego.
But you didn't know at that time what it would have been for, did you?
Well, they just said, you're going to be reassigned, you're going to be flown to San Diego, and we'll be reassigned out of there. And myself and about 30 other guys just sat in a waiting room and waited and waited and waited, and then they told us to go home. And that's the last I heard of them. And then my mom got rid of my Seabag. She wanted nothing to do with it. And what happened to my Seabag? I threw it away. Why?
Wait, while you were still on this 2-year interval of reserve?
I said, if I get another letter, I got to get my Seabag.
Oh my gosh.
I said,
so what happened? Did you make it through without any more letters?
No, no more letters.
And so, but your Seabag was gone?
My Seabag was gone. But all my stuff was in there too. My uniforms and so forth.
Gosh.
she was so anxious to get rid of it.
I hope you didn't lose anything personal in there that was...
No, most of the time Seabags were just clothing, all your personal stuff, you had another bag.
Boy, even from earlier on in our conversation, she really had a hard time with you being in the Navy and in the service.
She did not want me in the military. She had, well, she knew a lot about what had happened, and again, she had friends or relatives that had been in the military that did not do well. So she thought it was going to kill me.
So now you're living with them for a bit as you're transitioning. Were you then going to move forward with United Airlines?
I wanted to, but then I said I couldn't give up 2 years of my GI Bill just for that and have 2 years of just hanging around with no benefits. So I said, I want to go to college. Well, I didn't qualify for college, so I got into a military scholarship at the University of Illinois.
Okay.
And they allowed me to spend 6 months to prove myself, and I want to prove myself. I became an art major.
Okay. Wow.
Well, I was doing good.
No, with the drawings and your ability for that.
I figured I wanted to do something I like to do, so I like to paint.
Okay.
But as an art major, I wound up coming across, of all things, drawings done by children that were mistreated. And I could read in the drawings that, what they had done, how they saw the negatives of that, and the psychological aspect of how they transferred their problems onto art. And then I became a psych major instead. Okay.
Wow, that's amazing.
But the Navy gave me so much confidence, and I could do anything I wanted to do. I didn't really worry about it. I could have. And my first couple of jobs, I was hanging on paycheck to paycheck. It didn't mean anything. Just for some reason, I felt as though I can do it. No problem.
Wow. Well, that's I'm glad to hear something like that the service gave you that level of confidence.
I would say that's one of the things, that the best thing the Navy gave me was a self-confidence that I never had, or that I didn't know I had.
Okay.
And gave me a sense of, I can do this. And I'm grateful for the Navy for several things. Number one, the mechanical thing. I really kept my mechanical skills on top, and I did a lot of things after that on my own mechanically that I thought I could do, and I did. The challenges weren't that big mechanically.
Okay. So what were the transitions now in life for you in terms of occupation, job, further education?
I wound up not going for United. I wound up working as a refueler for
American?
No, it was a small little airline supply outfit. I can't remember the name of it off the bat. But anyway, I worked for them for about a year, or not even that, but more like 6 months as a refueler, fueling aircraft that were...
Now, was this in Chicago at O'Hare?
Chicago, O'Hare, yeah.
Okay.
And after maybe about 6 months to 8 months there, I saw that American was hiring people. So I thought I'd just go over there and fill out an application, and they accepted me. So I quit the refueling job and went to American and worked as a cargo handler. And they were hiring people just for the holidays. So 90 days, if you were working for them 89 days, the 90th day they would fire you. And the union said after 90 days they have to hire you or keep you on payroll.
Okay.
And fortunately it was a really tough winter. And I went...
And what year was this?
This would be 64.
Okay.
64, 65. And I made it through. I had 91 days, and the union picked me up, and I became a union member. Eventually, I left American Airlines after 42 years.
After how many years?
42.
Wow.
And again, the Navy taught me to stick with a paycheck.
And were you always at O'Hare for your service or your American Airlines connection?
I was sent to several locations for upgraded training, but I came back to O'Hare.
And did you move up through the ranks of American in terms of...
Started as a cargo handler, wound up leaving as a temporary supervisor, instructor, and load agent.
Wow.
But I think the best part of the whole thing was, again, the Navy gave me this sense of you can do something, you put your mind to it. And in the Antarctic especially, there were a couple times when these guys, I mean, I'm talking about guys that worked on a line in the Antarctic, fixing an airplane in 20 below, 25 below zero weather with the wind blowing. Those guys made me think, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. And it just amazes me how much ability a person can do something. They really, really have confidence in themselves doing it.
So it seems to me like everything was successful, you transitioning back to civilian life from the Navy service.
I think it was. My parents wanted me to spend more time with them, but I became so very demanding to be independent. I wanted to live by myself. I want to maintain, again, that self-confidence. I said, I want to have my own apartment. I want to do my own thing, have my own job, and I don't want to be living off my dad's paycheck.
Sure.
So I left after about a year and a half at home and got my own apartment.
Okay.
And kept my own career.
Still in Chicago?
Melrose Park.
Okay.
And again, the whole story goes down to what happened after I got out. I feel bad for the guys that got out of Vietnam because of the way they were treated. I wasn't mistreated because in '64 things weren't quite that way bad. But guys in the 70s were, I mean, they were really mistreated, both by people and by press. I just felt bad for those guys. And I think that was the biggest disadvantage of the Vietnam group, was that they had that negative attitude. I feel bad for them for that. And to this day, any Vietnam veteran, I'll pat them on the back.
I know, even though from some of the other interviews I've done of Vietnam vets, and I've sort of, it sort of stuck with me a little bit, but one of the things that they really appreciate is you can greet them, you can wish them all the best, but the phrase they like to hear is, welcome home.
Yeah, yeah. The guys, to this day I'm a living witness for a 19-year-old kid that got killed in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam more than 4 months, and he was killed in a firefight, and they lost his body. His body was recovered, and they lost it. And that's what happened in Vietnam. There was so much mayhem and confusion. Yeah. It was horrible. I felt, again, those guys really had it tough. I'm glad I wasn't one of them.
All right, we're going to start switching over into what we call in the interview period, what we call reflections.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of more general kind of, to get some of your feelings on stuff. So I know you've already mentioned some of the bits and pieces, but how did your military service affect your life?
It gave me a job. I had no idea where I was going to go when I joined the Navy. I got to see a lot of the world. I got to see a lot of the South Pacific. I met some fantastic people. Men that I thought were kind of humorous, but they were really very, I should say, dedicated to their jobs. I met an old sea salt that he would tell me stories that I would just spend hours listening to him. And I could only imagine what it was like to be him, a young man in those situations. And the places I saw, the people I met from different countries. I met, and then again, I was from the south side of Chicago. There was an attitude down there, a little south side attitude, that I really had changed in the Navy. I met people that we considered minorities, and they were great guys. I met guys that I could depend on, that people would never even think of them as somebody that you could depend on. I met a lot of women, ladies I should say. New Zealand was the most wonderful place I'd ever been. The people were so friendly, so kind. They were remembering that in 1945, about 20 years earlier, they were threatened by the Japanese taking their island. And the U.S. Navy was their only defense. So the Navy was considered the most important person they could run across. If they saw a sailor, they would pat him on the back, buy him a drink. People would invite you to their home for dinner. It was just phenomenal.
It's a good feeling.
Memphis, Tennessee, another town. Memphis, Tennessee, warmest people. They again invited me in their home. Let me date their daughter. California, Portuguese family took me under the wing. They're really great people. They were wonderful people. Hawaii, a young lady in Hawaii taught me how to wrap a a towel around me so it wouldn't fall down. it just so many things that I had learned. It was an experience that I would never have gotten just sitting at home in Chicago.
I'm glad to hear that it's such a wide exposure that you have to all these opportunities.
It gave me a lot of confidence in the world and at the same time in people in general. You can't judge somebody by just looking at them. Mm-hmm. You just spend some time with them. And guys I spent time with, I thought, oh, this guy's a loser. And after a time, man, I'd walk the earth with him. A couple guys I would not have trusted for even my wallet. I would have given them my wallet, no problem. It just, you learn things about people real fast.
I'm glad to hear
And the other thing I learned too is everybody has a story. I ran across so many different people, and you talk to them and you hear stories that you would not know that person had. And just talking to them, it was like opening up a new world of stuff that you had no knowledge of.
Interesting, very interesting. What do you think about, obviously with your military service, what are your thoughts about even how things are today with the military and are the conflicts that we get into and stuff like that? What feelings do you have about all of that?
My biggest thing right now is why do we have to have charities for wounded veterans? Why does a wounded veteran have to have a charity to help him? Our government should be helping him from the minute he comes back to the minute he dies. The other thing is, how can we take money that was dedicated to the military and reassign it to some political opportunity, some political use? The money was made and put aside by the Congress to give to the military, and yet you can pick out of that money to your own whim. That money should be considered untouchable, except for the military. It just aggravates me to see anything negative for the military. The Veterans Association, they try so hard to be good. And there's so many people that are really trying to make the Veterans Association better. And there's so many people that are doing everything to defeat it. It just aggravates me. Veterans should be dedicated to from the day they become a veteran to the day they die. And I think the worst thing that happens is that a guy gets chewed up by the military and they just disappear. They wind up on the streets and homeless people and wind up in institutions that they shouldn't have to. That's my biggest upset.
Well, that's a good thought that you're sharing with us on that. Because again, this interview that we're doing and your willingness to participate in this will be going to the Library of Congress, where there are many thousands of these interviews that exist. What would you like to say to future generations who might encounter this video 100 years from now, and to say to them, what are your thoughts about them and about the military and about the future of having participated in the military?
Well, there's no such thing as a good war. I've never talked to anybody who had been in a good war. They always talked about war and the horrors of a war. I hope nobody has to go into a war. I just feel bad for the guys that are in Afghanistan right now, and people in other stations that are located that are under somewhat military situations. I feel bad that their lives are endangered all the time, and people just don't recognize how much work that they have to go through. I mean, the most common guy, the guy that fixed the truck that goes through Afghanistan, he's there, his job, he's got a job to do, he does it every day. It's not something that he doesn't get a medal for or anything like that, he just does his job. There are military people all around the world just doing their job. They're not heroes, they're not famous, they haven't done anything exceptional, but they're doing their job, and that's a tough thing to do. In the Antarctic, my job was to do something, and I did it. I didn't think about it. And nobody praised me for it. I got a little medal out of it because I spent some time down there. But it was nothing that really was glorious. To me, it was just something I had to do. And people look at it and say, wow, that must have been fantastic. It was if you look at it as a visitor, but as an employee, basically you're doing your job. And these guys are doing jobs all around the world, some odd jobs that nobody even thought much of. An example was this Veterans Association. I went to a dinner, And I met a woman there who was she worked in Bosnia. She was helping with the food supply in Bosnia during the Bosnian War. Her job was nothing more than maintaining supplies of food flown in from different countries to feed the people in Bosnia. Nobody knew she existed. Nobody knew what her job was. The only reason that I knew was she told me about it.
Mm-hmm.
So every time you talk to a veteran, listen to a story. It may not be a heroic story, but it's a story of somebody doing their job when it really had to be tough to do that job.
Right. That's very well said. I like how you said that.
Yeah.
We're going to start entering what we call the conclusion phase of this interview. So one of the things I would like to ask you is that, is there anything you've always wanted to share about your service or your veteran experience that you never have?
Unfortunately, anybody listen to me, I'll share my experience. In fact, I don't often talk about it, but if they give it a chance, I will spend a good hour or two telling them about my experiences. I did enjoy the military. There were many times when I did not enjoy it, but overall, I would say for the 4 years of active duty, I did not have too many bad jobs. Of the 4 years, I had some pretty bad meals, but I also had some exceptional meals. I think anybody going into the military today, it has a function, it has a purpose, it has an advantage to you as well as to the government. I can't see anybody going in there for just because they have nothing else to do. Mm-hmm. Go in there with an intent. You're either going to help somebody or you're going to become somebody. Make it worthwhile, because it's a tough thing to do if you're just winging it. I feel sorry for anybody that has said they've been in the military and it was a waste of time. Yeah. There's no reason why it could be.
Interesting. What would you like people to know or remember about the story that you've shared with us?
That there are people down there just doing their job. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, like I said, that the guy working on the plane, the guy making the chow hall, they're working in the chow hall. Mm-hmm. There's people down there just doing an odd job that is not famous, not glorious, but yet they're down there doing their job. And they deserve recognition. They deserve some time to let somebody listen to their story. And as I said, if you see a veteran, listen to his story, because he's got something to say. Mm-hmm. He's got an experience that you don't know about.
Right. Very good. We're probably getting near the very end of it here. A couple more questions just to ask. And here's where I offer the opportunity, because we've talked about a lot of stuff. I've asked a lot of questions. You've given some great responses. But is there anything else that perhaps I've not asked you or that you would like to say something about that we've not covered in the interview?
Well, you're very, very thorough, I'll say that much. And I will say that the more I talk about it, the more I recall. And I think that there's nothing that I could say that would be, that you didn't do to stimulate that. And I think anybody that has a chance to see somebody's Veterans History Project, spend some time watching them. You'd be surprised how much information you can pick up, and how much knowledge you hear or pick up from conversations that you've had with the veterans, and stories that nobody hears.
Right.
There's a lot of stories that are worth listening to. They're better than a soap opera in some cases. Other cases, they're tedious. How somebody could do that for a period of time and still survive. Mm-hmm. The guys that were in active duty during Vietnam or any of the wars, some of the boredom. I mean, that's one thing I remember in the military the most. Hurry up and wait. We'd have assemblies. We'd spend hours waiting for somebody to come up. And we'd spend an hour standing at attention or at ease until some guy walked by, and then that was it. That was my whole day. I spent a whole day getting ready for this one guy to walk past me and then go back to my barracks. Those are the tedium, boring, horrible parts of the military. The useless function of a human being.
Interesting. All right, we're going to get to our last question here. What do you wish more people knew about veterans that they don't know?
They all have a story.
Very good. I like that. I like that.
I remember one sea salt who told me about a story he had. He had been in the Mediterranean, and he and his best friend had been on the ship for almost 6 months, and they hit a port for some liberty. And I think it was Turkey. I think it was a small city in Turkey. He got out with his friend, and they went out and they had a cab ride, and they went to I think it was a local bar or a restaurant, and they were both attacked, beat up and robbed. And they got back to the base, or back to the landing site, and went back to the ship. And his friend was really hurt pretty bad, and he couldn't understand why people would hurt him. He did nothing. It was just because he represented the United States. At that time, he was considered an enemy of the Turkish government, or what it might be. I have no idea what it was, but they took it out, what their dislike for the United States on that sailor. I said, how many other people have done that? That they reacted to a veteran, their discontent with their government. The veteran's just doing his job. He's there because he wanted to do that, he volunteered to do that. It's not his responsibility of who's doing what as far as the government-wise. He's just doing his job. He's been assigned to do that, and the military tells him to do it, he does it. But the way the government handles, don't take it out on the veterans. Those are the guys that take the brunt of what's going on in our government, and it should not. No veteran should ever be considered responsible for what his government's doing. Yeah. He's just doing his job.
Okay, that sounds good. You know, I forgot to ask you earlier on in our conversation. Are you married? Do you have children?
No. Married to next door neighbor. When I came back from the Navy, lady next door, a woman next door, and her sister were both young, attractive women. I was single and frivolous, so I offered to date the youngest sister, and she turned me down, and I wound up dating the older sister, and we became somewhat friends. We dated a couple times, and then I moved out of my dad's house and went to the Melrose Park, my own apartment. We became closer friends. I'd commute back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Eventually I married her. Her name's Constance, and we have a son, Jason, who at his early birth had some major medical problems. We thought wasn't going to make it. He made it. And he winds up marrying a wonderful woman, who, Michelle, who have given us 2 great granddaughters. So I'm very happy with the results of my marriage and my son's marriage.
Is your son still living in the area here?
He lives in Geneva.
Okay, so you still got a closeness to it.
Yeah, and my granddaughters. Yeah, I'm very, very glad. He was the only child, and he wound up marrying into a Polish-Italian family, which is horrendous people. And he had great friends. He grew up with some great friends. He developed friendships that I'm glad he developed. The friendships that I had in the military, I wish I'd continued. But he has done very well, and I'm very proud of him. And I'm very proud of my family per se. My wife she was a teacher. She raised our family, and she maintained me for all this period of 48 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm very, very happy with the results of my life.
Good. I usually ask this of all veterans. I probably should have asked you this long in our conversation here. Even when you were in service, did you ever have the equivalent of what you would consider a good luck charm?
Good luck charm. Maybe I wouldn't say the squadron. The squadron emblem.
Oh, okay.
It's called Puckered Pete. It's a penguin that shows its head too much to drink and too much to smoke.
Okay.
And it sort of shows the results of too much drinking and too much smoking. And I think that was my lucky charm because it told me that if I kept going the way I was going, I was going to become Puckett Pete.
Okay.
Because the military allows you to do things that you couldn't do in normal life because you always had a bed to come back to, you always had a meal, you always had a paycheck.
Okay.
But yeah, in fact, when I got out of the Navy, the first thing I thought is I got to give up some of this stuff. I got to give up the smoking, I got to give up the drinking. A lot of that was easy to do in the military, but very difficult to do in civilian life.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
Honor a veteran.
Very good. Anything else?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for participating. I'm so glad that you saw this and we connected and you were willing to do this. So I'm very happy for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, we're going to conclude our interview. So this does conclude our interview. Richard Marquardt, United States Navy, Cold War veteran for the Veterans History Project. Thank you, Richard, for your participation in the Veterans History Project. It means a lot to us as individuals and to the nation as a whole that your story of your military service will live on for all of us and future generations to reflect upon. Thank you so much for sharing with us your story of your military service. Thank you so much for your military service. It has been an honor and a privilege to have been able to interview you. Thank you.
Glad to do it anytime, Tony.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.